Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
Well, greetings, folks. This is Dr. Blair Ritchey, Executive Director of ISF, and with me on today's podcast are my co-hosts from the Carrington Group, family officers Jason Smith and Kyle Watkins. Our buddy Tyler, I guess, is in Vegas, supposedly attending a
struggling, I'm sure.
Yeah, attending a conference and trying not to lose his shirt, probably,
yes.
Right? He does it, yeah. Well, we're going to launch our 31st episode today, I guess. And as always, I got a little trivia for you. So you guys ready? These are stories of people like us from humble beginnings, kind of overcome a bunch to make a difference in the world. So this is the 75th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. So big happenings all summer long over in Europe for that. And so I've chosen one of the great military heroes in American history as today's legendary leader. Like most leaders, or many leaders, he was a very controversial figure in his day. His aggressive military style endeared him to his men and made him a target for his enemies. He preferred to lead from the front instead of the rear. Always interesting in a battle, right? He was famous for delivering impassioned speeches, one that earned him the nickname of Blood and Guts. I love that nickname for a general, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's just who's blood and whose guts would be the question there for me. But his military career first gained notoriety in the Pancho Villa raids into Mexico. In World War I, he established himself as a decisive commander of a tank division. And it was in World War II that his fame led him to become the general most feared by the Germans. He commanded the Third Army, which became operational in Normandy on August 1st, 1944, and engaged in continuous combat for 281 days. Think about what kind of year that was, huh? In that time, the Third Army crossed 24 major rivers, captured 81,500 square miles of territory, killed, wounded, or captured 1.8 million German soldiers. That would be 6 times its strength and personnel. But at a critical point in the war, he made my favorite military maneuver when he ordered a weather prayer. That's right. And the prayer was answered, and the Americans under this general went on to a decisive victory. So who was this legendary leader? I'll be back at the close today to see if you guys know your European World War history.
Or American history.
American history, right. Well, I mentioned this is our 31st episode, so we thought it might be fun to look back over 30 episodes. And who would have thought that we'd make to 31, quite honestly, but and just spend a little time reflecting on where we've been in this little journey and what we've learned from the guests. Just you know, when I think about that, I just think about the amazing people we've interviewed over the last 30 weeks, and the amazing diversity. That I mean, we've had some people, all kinds of leaders, no one mold, and it reminds me. I think one of the great lessons of leadership is that there is no one type of leader. Leaders come from everywhere and anywhere, and when you look at the essence of leadership as influence, this is a way anyone and everyone is a leader, and we've seen that, haven't we?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been great to hear the stories of people who do come from such a variety of backgrounds, and ultimately find their own path, towards success in a leadership role. And the word surprising comes to mind, I think, mostly because the leaders that we see most often begin to have some similar traits or portray some similar personality styles, the ones that books are written about or TV shows are made upon. But this journey's been fun because it's really broadened my perspective on who can become a leader, and it's really more of a decision to become a leader than it is maybe a selection.
You know, it's interesting for me as an ISF director. ISF is a leadership development organization, and what's interesting about ISF is our starting point involves aged out foster care youth, and they are amongst the most forgotten young people in American culture. And our students don't wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and say, I'm a leader. They don't have that. I mean, the road they've traveled has been so difficult, and many of them times it's been beaten down, truthfully, to where they've not been built up to where they have that self-image of a leader. And so one of the things that ISF does is to cast that vision of what they can become and the leadership potential that's in their lives. And as they get that vision, they begin to see that I can have influence, I can make a difference in the world. And we often, tell them about the stories we've heard on the Legends and Leaders podcast, because that's what to me, one of the big takeaways of this podcast has been is, we all have that capacity of leadership within us if we're willing to believe it and develop it and then generally use it for good.
That's been a great theme as well, that are leaders born or leaders made. And I think over the course of these 30 episodes, we've seen that leadership is a choice and it's an opportunity. You aren't necessarily, maybe you're born with certain characteristics that help develop your leadership style, but it's an opportunity for really anyone to step into that role and serve others through leadership.
And I'm curious, with ISF, I'm sure you see a wide diversity of children that you work with. Is there any common themes, or with the diverse group of leaders that we've talked to, is there anything that you see in both groups of leaders that maybe there's a common theme between the two?
Well, I do believe that at some point in everybody's journey, someone has to speak into their lives and give them a vision. And I think, when we talk about the guests that we've had, we've often asked them who influenced you on your journey, and they all go back to a parent, or they go back to a coach, or they go back to someone, right? They can name someone specific who believed in them, who saw something in them, and who inspired them and really motivated them. And that's just true with our ISF students. Unfortunately for them, it's rarely apparent because that's what let them down, right? But somebody came into their lives and inspired them and made, opened their eyes to that. And truthfully, that's the joy of ISF. We are that to them in many cases. We're part of the story, their story, in showing them how they can become that. So I think that's common, is that we all need someone in our lives to believe in us and invest in us and help us to be the success that we all aspire to be.
Yeah, and then it was interesting too to hear how early that can happen for some people. In middle school, high school, taking that success that maybe they're experiencing 25 plus years later, and being able to track it back to a significant interaction or event or person as early as their youth. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what kinds of leadership we saw and have seen in the people we've talked to, in terms of just takeaways that we have about leadership.
Mm-hmm. I think service is really the underlying theme that I've taken away. Talking everything from Dr. Carla Russo, who's got an amazing business and mission to help other people, but it's that service, it's her desire to build other people up that's ultimately brought her that success. And our most recent guest, Ryan Kaysen, with his organization and the focus he has on developing his employees, and the commitment and the dedication that creates from his employees, and ultimately to his company, but also to do the work that needs to be done for his clients. So in each case, I think these successful leaders have found someone or some group of people to serve, and that's what's led them down to their path of success.
Absolutely. And for me, it's something bigger than them that they're serving, and they're going to reap the rewards of. I think of Leonard Linsky. His business was, they were making a ton of money, but they're losing a ton of money at the same time, and he had to have a hard discussion with himself and figure this out. And then after he's gotten this thing turned around and had a very successful exit, he could have went off and, done whatever, but now he's going back and serving people that were in his shoes and helping them get to that level of success that he had. So I think, I don't know, that's very inspiring to see people who want that for other people.
Servant leadership is a code word, and it truthfully, over the years that I've watched it, I struggle with it, truthfully, because so many people use it as a way of manipulating others to get them to do what they want.
Yeah.
But I think we've seen some really genuine examples of servant leadership. People who get it, that if I can serve, and that as I serve, what comes back to me is the benefits are there, but it's the essence of finding my niche of service as a leader versus leading people, to serve me. And there is that authoritarian kind of model that when we think of leaders, we often think, you're here to serve me, I'm the leader, right? And we've seen people who get that that's not the way it works, that as a leader, my responsibility now is to serve you and build a team that becomes this high-performing team.
Yeah, and I think another example similar to that of Tom O'Donnell, who successfully built as a partner a large firm, had a successful exit, and now wants to help people realize their true passion, their true purpose in life through that success that they've had in business, and so even serving other leaders, so leaders serving leaders, people who have had success that just continue to have that underlying desire to help others and just continue to promote that same sense of dedication to people, regardless of how it's actually applied at different times in their lives.
Yeah. Well, it was a Zig-Ziglar line that you can get anything you want if you help enough people
Help
to get
enough other people get what they want.
And
Yeah,
I think we've seen that, haven't we?
absolutely.
That axiom is a pretty true one.
I think it's important too to know what it is that you want. And then I think that's been a common theme as well, is to see people who over time develop what that true underlying desire is. Once I think it might have been Michael Browning who told us that the money becomes the scoreboard. That's certainly how you keep track of if what you're doing is successful or not. But ultimately, it's the impact that you're having in the world around you that's going to have that lasting story. Right. So long after the scoreboard reaches its final numbers and is turned off, what is it that was the lasting impact of what that scoreboard helped you create?
Right. It's powerful. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the road of we've seen our guests travel and how almost invariably that road went through some hard places, didn't it?
Oh yeah.
And what they learned in those hard places really helped make them the leader that they are.
And even starting at some very hard places.
Right.
I think of Karen, growing up in El Salvador, literally in a one-room home, right, walking miles for water each day as a kid, to where she is now as an author and a speaker. Just the world of difference, from start to current, and who knows, where ultimately she continues to grow her presence and her impact.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure.
And the obstacles, that they overcome, they're almost like speed bumps, because the mindset that a lot of our leaders and our guests have had is, this is a setback. This isn't, something I've got to get over, get around, but this isn't going to stop. And I some of these situations, it's like, could I have gotten through this? I think of Adam Alfea, his dad, going bankrupt, and they're close to creating a platform which would have been precursor to eBay. And
right,
then seeing what that takes off to be like that, I don't know if I could have gotten over that, to be honest. That's brutal.
Well, and just the reality of failure is something that you either deal with that or you don't. And
Right.
how many people come up against that failure and they don't break through it, they don't overcome it, they don't get back up. I love my daughter was a gymnast, and so went on to the Air Force Academy, and so I spent a lot of time during her youth, just watching, going to a gym practice in a gym is interesting, because gymnasts, basically this is what practice is like. You try, you get up, you fail and you fall, you get back up and you try, and you fall and you fail, and you get back up, and this is over and over and over again, trying to learn a new trick, trying to learn a new routine. And one time she came home from the Air Force Academy, and her gymnastics team always had these really neat T-shirts, and they put a cute little phrase on it. And 1 year the phrase was, "No pain, no glory." And I thought about how true that statement is. That so many people, when they experience the pain, they quit. They can't handle that pain. They don't break through that pain. They don't endure that pain. They don't have that resilience that really is required because the glory always is on the other side of the pain.
Right.
It's always on the other side of the pain.
Yeah, and that makes me think of a quote. I can't tell you where I got this or heard this, but it's failure is not getting back up.
Right.
And it goes right. I mean, that's a great example, right there. But that's whenever you have the biggest growth, internally and personally, and what you have to do and how much you've got to grow personally to get over these things. So next time something comes up or comes along, you're that much stronger for it. And then you see that later down the road when they are leaders and they've got successful businesses, they can instill that into their people and in the culture of their business.
And I'm reminded of when Jake Horn with Trustantial talked to us about what he perceived at the time as the failure of his football career,
right.
And that ending at
Right.
Texas A&M. And so sometimes just the experience of a situation of where you are today versus looking back upon it, being able to take things with a different perspective. So at the time he said it felt like a failure. Then you get a few years down the road and you realize just how far he got, what percentage of people at the junior high level want to play collegiately at a Division I school. He was in a very small club, and he didn't make it to the next smaller club. But once you have perspective and see what it is you achieved, was it really failure, or was it a great part of your journey, a part of your story to leverage forward and take some lessons from?
Oh. And isn't it interesting that almost every story there was some willingness to take a risk that enabled them to achieve what they've achieved, and the fear of failure is so paralyzing to so many people that their risk aversive keeps them from even attempting that. And yet there's something about leadership that just is requirement to overcome the fear of failure and to be willing to take that risk.
And I was having a conversation separately with someone who was facing a tough decision, and he had three options. It was option A, option B, and he didn't realize that staying with the status quo was option C, and that there's this concept that not making a decision is actually a decision. Mm-hmm. And the status quo wound up, in his situation, being the riskiest of those options, because if all you are going to do is what you've done, then all you're going to get is what you've gotten.
That's right. That's so true. So true. I think another observation about as I reflect on our guests, there's a focus that leaders have to have in order to achieve. And some of us are dabblers. We like to dabble in a lot of things, and we never really kind of get that focus to our lives. And it's my observation is that the leaders who achieve the most have somehow been able to laser their energies and their focus, and it's that focus that brings drive and energy and passion, and all of that comes together. And the groups we talked to, they were not ho-hum people. They were very, very driven and had a focus about their lives. And I think that's a part of the journey, because we don't always have that from the get-go. But eventually, if we're going to be successful, that life does require us to bring that focus to the task.
Sure.
And I found, and sometimes I was thinking about another common theme is, and it goes along with focus, is they play to their strengths. Mm-hmm. And they surround themselves with people that complement those strengths, and they're not going to try to be everything. They're going to be what they're really good at, and then put a supporting cast around them, and then that's how they're going to reach their full potential.
Yeah, nearly every person, when we talked about their team and how they build
Yes.
a team, it was always, but I look for people smarter than me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Which for some of us isn't hard to do, but that's essential to team building.
And it's interesting that the concept is so confused in the business world when it's very obvious in other places. Like on sports teams, you wouldn't take your best pitcher and say, hey, let's try you out a catcher. Let's make you a better catcher. You build a team around people's strengths.
Yep.
And it's obvious in the sports arena, and it's obvious in some other areas. But in business, the concept of working on your weaknesses took root at some point. and it's encouraging to see more thought and more leadership around do what you're best at, do the things that align with who you are, and bring in those folks that enjoy doing the things that you don't enjoy doing or that you're not the best at.
Right. Well, part of our interview process has always been to ask them, what are you reading? What are you learning? And I guess my big takeaway from that part of the show has been, the podcast has been, these guys all are lifelong learners.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
They are not done. They're works in progress, and you can just see, here's what I'm reading, here's what I'm listening to, and I thought that was an interesting observation about leadership too.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to that that desire to serve others still as well. To know that there's more to be done and that can be done, and there's opportunities to learn from other people on an ongoing basis.
And always trying to get better too. It's not, I know it all. I look at the success I've had. It's how can we continue to get better? Yeah. It's a journey. It's not a finish line. Talk about the scoreboard, but it goes back to the internal rewards, and it's always getting better, always driving yourself to be better. And then you see it, then there's a shift where they start talking about their team and how their team grows and how all that happens. So it's really interesting.
It is an investment in others, obviously,
right.
But there was also a theme of investing in myself.
Yes,
sure.
I have to invest in myself in order to have something to invest in others and to lead the team and to grow the business and to become. Because if I'm still today. If I'm where I am today 5 years from now, then I'm stuck. I can't.
Right.
I have to be bigger 5 years from now than I am now if I want my business to be bigger too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a common theme, that they all could identify something that they're learning, something that they're reading, something that they're investing in terms of their own self-development.
And I thought what was unique about our guest Curtis Height from Improving was he, in addition to reading new books, he had a select number of books that he reads over and over again. Over the course of a couple of years, he circles through, I think it's either 3 or 5 books. And he said that depending on where he is in life, he's picking up different themes, different messages from those same books. So it's even about realizing that you're not a static individual, that life is happening around you. Your circumstances and situation changes over time. And so you can even learn new things from the same material, depending on how life has kind of how you've experienced life.
Yeah. One of our guests, I can't remember which one it was, had a Billy Graham moment where they read a chapter in the book of Proverbs every day for 30 days. Every month they would work through that. And you think about the discipline of that every month and every day reading from the book of Proverbs, and you think, well, that's the same material over and over again. But every time you go through it, it's something different, right?
Right.
You're seeing something else is hitting you because you're in a different place when you go through it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about our journeys too. When you think about that, what are some of the things that maybe from the or even from your own journey that you saw modeled in the podcast that were really shapers in terms of your self growth and self improvement and things you've read and kind of heroes that have made you who you are?
Well, just to keep speaking on materials, one book that's had a tremendous impact on me is Extreme Ownership, and it's written by Jocko Willink. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And he's an ex-Navy SEAL. Then he went back and actually trained SEALs and was a commander in the Iraqi war. And so the book is written on a story, whether it's been in training or war setting. And then and they say this over and over again. This is not to glorify war or battle or anything. This is for a lesson. And then afterwards, here's the principle. And then how does this apply to business? Because now they're business consultants. Right. And the one that really stuck out to me was leading up the chain and leading down the chain and taking full ownership of that. Because you think of leaders, you talked about earlier, authoritarian, you go down and you're talking down. But you also said, anybody that has influence is a leader. So no matter where you are in the chain, you can be a leader, and you've got to take ownership. If you want things to change, if you want to get better, if you want your organization to get better, your family, any relationships to get better, take ownership of it, and you do the things that are necessary to make those positive changes. And so that's kind of opened my I don't know, maybe a bigger perspective on having everything to where, there are circumstances that happen or things happen, but you've got to react. Like, you've got to take full ownership of how you react and what you're going to do next to have the impact that you want to have.
Right. Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
Yeah, for me, it was Zig Ziglar's book, See You at the Top.
Yeah.
And it did two things for me. The first, the quote about you can have anything you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. Business has a series of interactions rather than a transaction with each client or customer, or at this time I had the software development company when I read that book, and so it was about building relationships and ultimately how do I help that client achieve what they want, because that's ultimately how I can get what I want. And so it shifted my perspective on what it is to be in business, but it also opened my eyes to the concept of self-development and self-improvement. And so I just started to consume everything I could. He wrote that book, I think, in the mid-'70s. And so at this time, so at this time in the early 2000s, it's like, okay, he's got a whole body of work I can pour through, and that's what ultimately led me to the idea of self-improvement, self-development, and taking on that lifelong learner mindset for business, where I've always enjoyed learning new things and investigating things. To do it in business is really what Zig Ziglar led me to begin to do.
Cool. I was a young leader. I'll still remember the first time I went to a conference and heard John Maxwell speak, and it introduced me to John and his inspiring just life and his unbelievable understanding of leadership. And one of the things about the podcast that's fun, and it's what happens before and after the podcast that people don't know about. And we had this moment with Dr. Russo that I just loved Carla, and we started talking about just who has influenced our lives, and we've both been influenced by John Maxwell. And she said, "Well, I'm a friend with John," and she pulls out her phone and takes a selfie of the two of us and shoots it off to John. and just a moment of just interacting with John together, the three of us, was a kind of a cool moment for me. And grateful for men like John Maxwell who take the time not only to lead but who understand leadership and give books like Developing the Leader Within You, which was formative for me to develop that leader within me and to do that. And every one of our guests seemed to have somebody that they read that shaped them, and that's kind of a great lesson for all of us who want to be leaders. You don't stop learning, you don't stop growing, and there's always more to learn and go.
And the information and the inspiration is out there. I think that's what's important too for aspiring leaders, to know that it's not, we might hear things like it's lonely at the top, but I don't think it has to be.
No.
I think that can be a decision you make, that while there might be certain things that leaders in certain situations have to face on an individual basis, it doesn't have to be a lonely journey.
And if it is, we've done something wrong, probably, right?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Way to do it better. Well, it's been fun 30 episodes. Who knows what we're going to learn in the next 30?
Yeah, look forward to it.
Right?
It's kind of a good thing to do, and grateful for all of the guests who have invested their time with us and made it better. And hopefully our listeners will have enjoyed this look back over the first 30, and as we get ready for the next 30 journey, and just continue to grow our own leadership. Well, before we leave, I do have a little trivia to wrap up. So, so you remember who the general was who was the most feared general amongst the Germans?
GSP, George S. Patton.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Favorite movie? Remember who starred?
I don't know who starred, but I mean, I've got some quotes in my head.
Yeah.
It's probably not proper
Air
to
friendly,
podcast
podcast friendly.
I mean, you can see what George S. or what Patton looks like, but I'll never forget George C. Scott's portrayal of Patton in the movie, and that's how I always think of Patton. Is he looks like George C. Scott? He's not, but quite an interesting figure. That's great. Well, folks, that'll be a wrap for today's podcast, and thank you for your investment in the journey, and hope you'll be along with us for many more in the weeks to come. And just want to wrap things up by reminding us that if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader.
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by the Carrington Group. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. To learn more about the Carrington Group, visit their website at www.carringtonfo.com or Google Carrington Group, Dallas, Texas. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphaned youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. To learn more about ISF, visit their website at isfsite.org or Google International Student Foundation to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.